If this is your first time here, you're about to witness a true story that proves courage is the ultimate currency. The packed first-class cabin fell silent, the tension thicker than the fog rolling over the Manhattan skyline outside. The air conditioning hummed, but the atmosphere was freezing. Zara Johnson, the 19-year-old black tech prodigy, stood her ground against the hostile flight attendant. I said, "Move to economy where you belong," the attendant, Stephanie Walsh, hissed, pointing to a white socialite waiting expectantly. Zara's hand trembled, not from fear, but from the raw fury of a lifetime witnessing prejudice. She reached for her phone, pulling up the Skyline Airlines executive profile page. "Stephanie, is it?" Zara's voice cut through the silence. "I'd like you to meet someone." She turned the screen toward the flight attendant. "That's me, Zara Johnson, majority owner of Skyline Airlines. Your boss." What would happen next in this high-stakes confrontation that would change the airline industry forever? Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination and justice, let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up against racism and fighting for equality, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more incredible true stories of courage in the face of prejudice. Zara Johnson was not just successful, she was exceptional. At just 17, while her peers were preparing for college, she developed an aviation logistics algorithm, complex code that could predict weather, optimize fuel, and reduce delays by a staggering 40%. She grew up watching her parents, both brilliant aerospace professionals, struggle against the invisible wall of discrimination at Skyline Airlines. Using the millions from her patents, Zara executed a brilliant clandestine financial maneuver, quietly acquiring 51% of Skyline Airlines stock over 18 months. The business world remained oblivious that a teenage black girl now controlled one of America's largest carriers. Only her mentor, Vivian Blackwood, a seasoned former executive, knew her secret. Vivian had advised, "Observation before action. Experience the airline as a passenger before revealing yourself." Dressed in a Stanford hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, blending in like any other student, Zara boarded the transcontinental flight from New York to San Francisco. But she had an unknown threat, Stephanie Walsh, the senior flight attendant. With 15 years at Skyline, Stephanie's resentment over slow-creeping diversity had festered. Her 12 discrimination complaints mysteriously buried by Richard Harmon, the chief operating officer and true power behind the scenes. Richard, furious about the anonymous takeover, was close to a corporate coup. As Zara settled into her first-class window seat 3A, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "We know who you are. Stay in your lane or regret it." Someone knew. And the aircraft door closed with a heavy thud, sealing her inside with a visible threat and an invisible enemy. Stephanie Walsh, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, strode through first class. She offered warm smiles to white passengers, but her demeanor frosted over when she reached Zara. "Ticket?" Stephanie demanded flatly. Then scrutinizing the name, "Are you sure you're in the right section?" The deliberate humiliation continued until Carlos, a nervous Latino flight attendant, confirmed Zara's seat was correct. But the situation escalated when Margaret Whitfield, a wealthy socialite and heir to a hotel fortune, demanded Zara's specific window seat for a dubious medical reason. Stephanie, now armed with corporate backing, saw her chance. "You'll need to relocate," she announced loudly. "There's a perfectly good seat in economy." Jason Miller, the civil rights attorney seated beside Zara, interjected, pointing out the other empty first-class window seats. "This isn't the place for people like you anyway," Stephanie whispered, her voice dangerously hard. "Either move voluntarily or I'll call security." The cabin fell silent. Zara felt the weight of every eye judging. In that moment, she made her decision. Enough observation. It was time for action. "Stephanie, is it?" Zara's voice carried through the cabin as she turned her phone, displaying the executive profile page. "That's me, Zara Johnson, majority owner of Skyline Airlines." "Your boss." Gasps rippled through the stunned cabin. Stephanie's face drained of color. The fight was just beginning. The engines roared to life, but the tension in the first-class cabin was thicker than the clouds outside. Stephanie was immediately reassigned to economy, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. Zara, now fully in control, documented the incident on her secure laptop, emailing Vivian Blackwood. Explicit statement made about people like me not belonging in first class. Documenting for policy review. Across the aisle, Margaret Whitfield whispered to her seatmate, clearly doubting the teenage owner's claim. Beside Zara, the civil rights attorney Jason Miller slid his card onto her tray table. "What happened today wasn't an isolated incident," he murmured. "I've received complaints about Skyline for years." Then the cold reality struck. Another text from the unknown number. "Ownership won't protect you for long. Board meeting in progress. Enjoy your temporary position." Zara checked her executive portal. An emergency board meeting called by Richard Harmon was in progress. The official reason, addressing public relations crisis and leadership concerns. They were moving against her while she was literally in the air. Meanwhile, 35,000 feet below, Richard Harmon stood before the hastily assembled board in Manhattan, conveniently avoiding the fact that the majority shareholder was absent. At the same time, the video of the confrontation recorded by a passenger was uploading to social media. As Skyline racism began trending before the plane even hit the Midwest, and the company's stock dropped 12%. When the flight finally landed in San Francisco, the scene outside was chaotic. A crowd of reporters awaited. As passengers activated their phones, gasps spread through the cabin as they saw the viral video. Corporate security, wearing Skyline Airlines patches, not airport insignia, boarded the plane and insisted on escorting Zara through a private exit. Jason Miller leaned in. "Be careful. I've seen corporate security used to isolate whistleblowers." Zara quickly realized she wasn't being protected. She was being contained. The security team ushered her into a private vehicle that drove not toward the main terminal, but a separate administrative building. Her phone signal was suddenly blocked. Zara Johnson, majority owner of Skyline Airlines, was now a prisoner in her own company. Zara found herself locked in a secure corporate conference room. Through intermittent data access on her laptop, she saw the full scale of the crisis. The stock was in freefall, and Richard Harmon, citing arcane bylaws, had successfully convinced enough board members to grant him temporary executive authority. Zara bypassed the room's communication blocks and accessed the company servers through a backdoor network she'd previously discovered. What she found confirmed the coup. But even as she watched, files began disappearing in real time. Years of evidence, hundreds of discrimination complaints were systematically erased. That's illegal destruction of evidence. Vivian Blackwood, arguing outside with security whose credentials had been suspended by Harmon, had no way to help. But Zara saw something worse. Richard's team was building a counter-narrative, uploading fabricated performance reviews and doctored emails that painted Zara as an unstable, irrational investor staging a publicity stunt. Then, a crucial discovery. The deletion was being done using Stephanie Walsh's login credentials. Zara accessed security camera feeds and saw the grainy footage. Stephanie, her makeup still smeared, was being ushered into the administrative building by Richard Harmon. They were working together. Further investigation revealed the hidden connection. Stephanie was Richard's former sister-in-law, his eyes and ears on the cabin crew. Just as Zara reached for her burner phone to call Jason Miller, the conference room door swung open. Two security officers entered, led by Margaret Whitfield's assistant. "Mr. Harmon has arranged for your transfer to corporate headquarters for a full debriefing," the assistant said, her smile professionally chilling. Zara stood her ground. "I am the majority shareholder, and if you touch me without consent, that's assault. I suspect neither of you wants to risk your pensions on Richard Harmon's illegal power play." The standoff was broken by a sudden blaring fire alarm. Federal transportation authorities had just entered the terminal, and someone had created a diversion. Zara grabbed her laptop and ran for the emergency exit. Vivian Blackwood was waiting beside a nondescript sedan. "Get in," Vivian shouted. "Richards deleted the discrimination complaints archive and convinced half the board you're staging a publicity stunt." The battle for Skyline Airlines had moved beyond a simple incident. It had become a high-stakes corporate war, with Zara fighting not just for justice but for control of the company she rightfully owned. The engines of the sedan roared, and they sped into the San Francisco traffic with Richard Harmon's security team close behind. Inside a secure hotel suite overlooking the bay, Zara accessed the company systems again. Files were still disappearing, But she had secured enough evidence. Richard had locked her out of the central executive servers, but he hadn't accounted for her redundant access points. "They're framing me," Zara whispered, realizing the depth of the conspiracy. But she now had the proof. Stephanie was Richard's pawn, helping him erase evidence to seize control. Zara picked up the burner phone. She called Jason Miller. She called Vivian Blackwood, who was immediately reinstated by Zara herself using her secure executive credentials. And then she called the Federal Transportation Authority, giving them the details of the illegal deletion of evidence and the unauthorized executive coup. Within the hour, Jason Miller filed an emergency injunction in federal court, citing illegal detainment, corporate obstruction, and fiduciary misconduct by Richard Harmon. Simultaneously, Vivian Blackwood, using her restored access, released a concise, unvarnished statement to all major news outlets. The majority owner, Zara Johnson, was illegally detained by Richard Harmon's security team after exposing systemic racism. Mr. Harmon is now attempting a corporate coup while destroying evidence of years of discrimination. The narrative shifted instantly. Richard Harmon, moments from cementing his control, was instead served with federal subpoenas and a temporary restraining order freezing his executive authority. The footage of Zara running from the burning building, released minutes later by Jason Miller's firm, went viral with the caption, "Owner on the run." Richard Harmon resigned the next morning, followed by the entire board who supported his illegal power grab. Stephanie Walsh, exposed as a willing accomplice and facing criminal charges for evidence tampering, was permanently terminated. Zara Johnson arrived at Skyline headquarters not in a hoodie, but in a tailored suit, taking her rightful place as the CEO and majority owner. Her first action, commissioning a sweeping, independent investigation into decades of discrimination, led by the newly appointed chief counsel, Jason Miller, voiceover, concluding thought. The assault on Zara Johnson was an attempt to maintain an outdated, prejudiced order. But they underestimated the power of the new generation. This wasn't just a corporate battle. It was a watershed moment proving that courage, strategy, and moral clarity are the only things that truly belong in first class. What an incredible story of bravery in the face of entrenched power. The system that tried to crush Zara Johnson ended up being rebuilt by her. Her first flight as owner became the last flight of the old Skyline Airlines. With her escape successful, Zara outlined her plan to Vivian. "Then I'm using my emergency access to send a message through the airport announcement system. It's time to let Vivian know exactly where I am and what's happening." But as Zara outlined her plan, the laptop screen suddenly flickered, displaying a chilling warning. "Unauthorized access detected. System lockdown initiated. They found us," Zara realized, quickly disconnecting. "But not before I downloaded something they don't want anyone to see." She turned the screen toward Vivian, displaying a confidential offshore account statement in Richard's name. Regular, substantial payments flowed in from a shell company that, upon closer inspection, connected directly to Margaret Whitfield's family trust. "This isn't just about racism," Zara said quietly. "They've been embezzling from the airline for years, using discrimination complaints as leverage to silence witnesses." Vivian completed the thought. Employees who threatened to speak out about racism were paid off through these accounts off the books. And now the majority owner is a 19-year-old black woman who can't be bought. Their worst nightmare. Before they could discuss further, Zara's burner phone rang. Jason Miller's voice was urgent and clear. "Zara, listen carefully. Richard Harmon has filed emergency restraining orders claiming you're attempting a hostile takeover. Security teams are searching the city for you. They're monitoring all official channels." "I need to reach the board members directly," Zara replied. "That's why I'm calling," Jason confirmed. "I've secured a conference room at my firm's office. 3 board members have agreed to meet us there. They're questioning Richard's story, especially after seeing the viral video. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Meanwhile, can you file emergency injunctions to prevent further deletion of company records?" "Already done," Jason confirmed. "And Zara, be careful. My sources say Richard has hired private security beyond the company team. These aren't corporate guards with retirement plans to protect. These people operate in gray areas." As they exited through the hotel's service entrance, unaware a hidden camera had captured their departure, Richard Harmon watched their movement on a tablet in a downtown office. "She's on the move," he informed a voice on the other end. Heading to Baker & Associates, most likely. Yes, I understand the stakes. Do whatever is necessary. The sleek glass tower of Baker & Associates rose 42 stories above the financial district. Zara and Vivian navigated loading docks and maintenance corridors, following Jason's instructions to avoid the main entrance. Upstairs, the conference room hummed with tense energy. 3 crucial Skyline board members, Davis Channing, Wei Jiang, and Isabella Diaz, looked up as Zara entered. "Thank you for coming," Jason began, the digital display showing Skyline's plummeting stock price. Zara moved directly to the point, methodically presenting her evidence: the discriminatory incident, her illegal detention, the systematic deletion of records, and the damning offshore accounts linking Richard and Margaret Whitfield to embezzlement through settlements. This wasn't random discrimination, Zara concluded. It was a targeted attempt to provoke an incident they could use against me. The implications sank in. Richard wasn't just stabilizing the company. He was using the crisis to consolidate control and commit a corporate crime. "We need to call an emergency board meeting, a legitimate one, with all members present," Channing finally stated. As the discussion continued, strategies forming and dissolving, Zara's temporary phone buzzed with an ominous text from an unknown number. "They know where you are." Richard's private security team entering the building now. Back entrance. "Not alone, armed. We need to move," Zara announced, her voice strained. Richard's escalating beyond corporate politics. The building's security alert system chimed softly. "Attention. Unauthorized access detected in Service Area B. Security personnel en route." Jason quickly led them toward an executive bathroom with a hidden panel, a secret escape route for when verdicts went south. As they hurried through the narrow passage, Zara heard heavy footsteps and authoritative voices behind them. "Where are we going?" Zara whispered as they descended a utility stairwell. "Courthouse," Jason replied curtly. "We're filing for emergency injunctive relief and a restraining order against Richard, not the other way around." 20 minutes later, they stood before Judge Helen Kimura, who reviewed their documents. "You're alleging that Mr. Harmon has effectively kidnapped the majority owner of a major airline, destroyed evidence, and is now pursuing her with armed private security." Judge Kimura, a formidable woman with a reputation for efficiency, nodded slowly, accepting Zara's complex proof of ownership. "I've seen enough to issue a temporary restraining order against Mr. Harmon, preventing him from exercising any executive authority pending a full hearing." As they left the courthouse with the signed orders, Zara spotted a familiar, chilling sight: Margaret Whitfield speaking intensely with Richard Harmon across the street. Their expressions transformed from confidence to alarm as they spotted Zara's approaching police cruiser escort. "That's our escort to your next meeting," Jason explained with a small smile. "The Federal Aviation Administration and the SEC are very interested in possible safety violations and the suspicious financial activity you've uncovered." The real battle had begun, but Zara now had the moral and legal high ground. The Skyline Airlines emergency board meeting convened at 7:30 the following morning. Zara entered last, her tailored charcoal suit projecting competence and control. Richard Harmon, surrounded by his remaining allies, sat at the long mahogany table, his face hardened into practiced neutrality. The chairman, Howard Peterson, a 72-year-old veteran, called the meeting to order, holding up Judge Kimura's signed injunction suspending Richard's executive functions. Richard presented his narrative first. Zara was an inexperienced activist using social justice issues to hijack the company. "Ms. Johnson has never run so much as a lemonade stand," he concluded smoothly. "This is about experience versus activism, plain and simple." When Zara's turn came, she connected her laptop and shared what Richard had desperately tried to hide: hundreds of discrimination complaints systematically buried, along with the offshore accounts linking settlement money to Margaret Whitfield's family trust. "This isn't about one incident," Zara concluded. "It's about a systematic pattern of discrimination protected by senior leadership for their financial benefit." When Margaret Whitfield attempted to dismiss the claims, Zara clicked to a new slide exposing the concealed family connections: Richard, Margaret, his aunt by marriage, and Stephanie, his former sister-in-law, all working together. Richard stood abruptly. "This is character assassination." "Sit down, Richard," Peterson ordered sharply. "For the next 30 minutes, Zara outlined her vision: transparent reporting, leadership diversity, and new accountability structures, demonstrating a nuanced understanding of aviation economics that clearly surprised the board. Age reflects time, not capability, she stated firmly. When the board reconvened, the vote was deadlocked. 6 supporting Richard, 6 supporting Zara. All eyes turned to Peterson for the tiebreaker. The chairman removed his glasses slowly. In 30 years, I've never seen evidence of misconduct this clear or this disturbing. He paused, looking directly at Richard. My vote is for Ms. Johnson's reinstatement as controlling shareholder with full authority. Richard's facade finally shattered. This is corporate suicide. You think discrimination is the issue? This is business. Middle America doesn't want to see certain people in first class. That's market reality, not racism. I believe that outburst clarifies matters, Peterson said quietly. Security will escort Mr. Harmon from the premises. His company access is terminated, effective immediately. As Richard was led away, he pointed at Zara, his voice shaking with rage. You think you've won? I built this airline. I have friends in regulation, in finance, in places you don't even know exist. You've made an enemy you can't afford, little girl. The war for Skyline's future had only just begun. The boardroom victory proved fleeting. By noon, a coordinated public relations counterattack launched. Narratives appeared across media platforms questioning Zara's inexperienced activist leadership. Richard Harmon was suddenly portrayed as a veteran unfairly pushed aside. The PR assault escalated. Customer service lines were flooded by organized complaint campaigns, and anonymous sources leaked concerns about Zara's algorithm, suddenly painting her as untested and risky. By evening, the campaign turned dark. Zara's personal accounts were flooded with racist death threats, and her college dormitory received a false bomb threat. This is intimidation, Zara stated quietly, showing Vivian the graphic threats. The next morning brought a fresh wave of attacks. 3 former Skyline employees gave coordinated interviews claiming they were forced out for questioning diversity initiatives. Stephanie Walsh reappeared, claiming Zara had orchestrated the entire incident to seize control. The most damaging blow came from Margaret Whitfield, whose whispers sent the stock plummeting another 15%. We're fighting on their terrain, Vivian observed. Corporation versus individual. Experience versus youth. We need to reframe the entire conversation. The pressure campaign culminated in a legal bombshell. Richard filed a $50 million defamation lawsuit against Zara and sought a temporary restraining order barring her from Skyline premises. The assigned judge? Judge Raymond Whitfield, Margaret's cousin. The system was vast and interconnected. Richard was pulling strings through networks established over decades, ensuring that for every public battle Zara won, 3 more erupted on different fronts. Alone in her temporary bedroom, Zara allowed herself a moment of doubt. Maybe I'm not prepared for this level of warfare. Vivian placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. They're escalating because you're winning. The conversation was interrupted by breaking news. Federal authorities announced an investigation that targeted current and former leadership equally. Richard's friends and regulatory agencies were making sure that if he went down, he took Zara with him. The war was now a desperate race to survive. Her phone buzzed one last time with a text from an unknown number. The board has voted, but the war for Skyline Airlines is far from over. Richard Harmon's final desperate move, a $50 million lawsuit and a corrupt judge, has left Zara Johnson isolated and exhausted. Who is behind the final anonymous text? Will the Whitfield family's deep-rooted power finally overwhelm the 19-year-old owner? The next chapter reveals a secret ally from within Richard's inner circle that changes everything. Dawn broke over San Francisco. Zara had barely slept, preparing for the 9 a.m. temporary restraining order, TRO hearing before Judge Raymond Whitfield. Cousin of her nemesis, Margaret. He's claiming your statements about discrimination at Skyline constitute defamation, Jason explained, reviewing the core of Richard's audacious argument. But they're true statements backed by evidence, Zara countered, which is why Richard's team has filed motions to exclude your backup server records, claiming they were obtained through unauthorized access. Welcome to corporate litigation, Jason said grimly. It's rarely about justice and frequently about procedural advantages. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Richard, impeccably groomed, projected calm confidence. Judge Whitfield's bias became immediately clear, excluding Zara's witnesses while permitting all of Richard's. The judge continually sustained objections when Jason attempted to introduce evidence of Richard's offshore accounts, citing relevance and admissibility. By noon, the outcome seemed predetermined. Judge Whitfield issued the TRO, barring Zara from entering Skyline premises, contacting employees, or exercising operational control for 10 business days. Richard's legal strategy had successfully neutralized the majority owner. This temporary order changes nothing about the underlying facts, Zara declared outside the courtroom, maintaining her composure. Back at headquarters, they strategized. "We need a two-pronged approach," Vivian advised. "First, appeal the TRO immediately. Second, build a parallel case that doesn't depend on your direct involvement," Jason agreed. He spoke with attorneys representing former employees, who were willing to consolidate into a class action lawsuit naming Richard, Stephanie, and Margaret personally. Then, an unexpected opportunity. Stephanie Walsh's attorney contacted Jason, offering to flip. In exchange for civil immunity, Stephanie would provide recorded conversations where Richard explicitly instructed cabin crew to prioritize traditional passengers, code for white customers in first class. While this unfolded, Margaret Whitfield launched her own counteroffensive. Using political connections, she pressured the federal agencies investigating Skyline. The message was clear. The Whitfield family influence extended into government regulatory bodies. Richard continued to escalate, initiating termination proceedings against employees who had publicly supported Zara, a systematic purge of potential witnesses. The team prepared to appeal Judge Whitfield's ruling, but needed a breakthrough. It came from an anonymous source, a junior attorney at Richard's firm who revealed that his team possessed internal memoranda acknowledging the validity of discrimination claims, but had deliberately withheld them from discovery. They were set to petition for reconsideration before a different judge, citing potential conflicts of interest. The stakes kept rising, with Richard filing for an extension of the TRO and a final legal bomb, a defamation lawsuit against Zara seeking $50 million. As the legal clock ticked down, Zara received a cryptic message from an internal ally. Margaret left her personal phone in meeting room. Password saved on sticky note. Downloading contents now. This changes everything. Vivian stared at the recovered evidence in stunned silence. The phone contained hundreds of text messages, voice memos, and encrypted communications between Margaret, Richard, and a network of allies. They were actively coordinating similar, discriminatory practices across multiple airlines, an industry-wide conspiracy involving price fixing for settlements, and shared blacklists of complainants. Most damning were Richard's voice memos explicitly outlining the plan to detain Zara at the airport and manipulate the media. While they processed this game-changer, Richard and Margaret executed their most audacious move, an emergency shareholder meeting with deliberately abbreviated notice. The agenda: a vote to adopt a leadership stability provision that would permanently prevent Zara from active management, effectively neutralizing her ownership control. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. the following morning, precisely when Judge Whitfield would be hearing arguments about extending the TRO. Richard had ensured Zara couldn't be in two places at once. "We need to split up," Zara decided. "Jason, you handle the court hearing. Vivian and I will wait outside the shareholder meeting until the second the order is lifted." The strategy depended on perfect timing and communication. If the TRO remained, Richard and Margaret would secure their power. That night, Zara confided in Vivian, "I never wanted to be a corporate warrior. I just wanted to create an airline where people like my parents could work without facing discrimination. That simple goal threatens everything Richard represents," Vivian replied softly. "Systems of inequality don't yield power willingly." Morning arrived. At the courthouse, Judge Whitfield initially refused to consider the evidence from Margaret's phone. "Your Honor," Jason persisted, "this evidence directly proves that the restraining order was obtained through fraud upon the court." After tense arguments, Judge Whitfield reluctantly admitted the evidence. As the recordings played, Richard's face darkened. The most damning clip was a recorded conversation between Richard and Judge Whitfield himself, discussing the case before it was officially assigned. The clear evidence of judicial impropriety transformed the atmosphere instantly. Judge Whitfield stiffly recused himself. The matter was immediately reassigned to Judge Lucy Chen, known for her strict fairness. Judge Chen reviewed the evidence and reached her conclusion in 30 minutes. The restraining order is dissolved effective immediately. Mr. Harmon appears to have obtained it through misrepresentation and coordinated action with the previous judge, constituting a textbook case of fraud upon the court. Jason immediately called Zara, but their secure channel experienced interference. His repeated attempts failed as the clock ticked toward the shareholder vote at Skyline headquarters. Zara and Vivian waited across the street. At 8:58, with no word from Jason, they faced an impossible choice. "We have to move," Vivian decided. "I'll go in first. If I text proceed, it means I've confirmed the order has been lifted." Vivian entered the building, finding the shareholder meeting had begun 5 minutes early. Richard was already announcing the vote. Outside, Zara's phone remained silent. The clock showed 9:02. The vote was imminent. Legal consequences seemed abstract compared to the immediate threat. Making her decision, Zara entered the building. As she approached the boardroom doors, her phone finally chimed. A text from Jason, delayed by technical issues. "Order lifted. Enter legally." Zara pushed open the boardroom doors just as Richard called for the vote. "Ms. Johnson, you are in violation of a legal restraining order," Richard stammered, his confidence faltering. "The restraining order has been dissolved," Zara announced calmly, displaying Jason's message. "Judge Chen ruled it was obtained through fraud upon the court. Additionally, Judge Whitfield has recused himself after evidence of improper coordination with you came to light." "That's impossible." Richard's composure cracked visibly. "And now, as majority shareholder of Skyline Airlines, I have an alternative proposal for consideration," Zara stated. She outlined the systematic abuses and potential criminal behavior revealed through Margaret's phone. "The leadership stability provision isn't about experience," Zara concluded. "It's about preventing accountability." Richard attempted to regain control, but a new voice interjected from the doorway. Stephanie Walsh. Visibly nervous, but determined, she had arrived directly from the courthouse. "For 15 years, I followed directives about passenger treatment based on appearance, race, and perceived wealth," Stephanie stated clearly. "Those directives came directly from Mr. Harmon. What happened with Ms. Johnson wasn't an isolated incident. It was standard procedure." Richard finally lunged toward her, control shattering completely. "You ungrateful after everything we've done to protect you." Security personnel quickly restrained Richard, whose threatening advance toward a witness had crossed a critical line. As he was escorted from the room, the remaining shareholders sat in stunned silence. The ensuing vote, proposed by Zara, for the removal of Richard Harmon from all positions and the dissolution of Margaret's special privileges, passed with 64% support as federal agents from the SEC and the Department of Justice. Civil Rights Division entered the building, the evidence from Margaret's phone having accelerated their investigation dramatically. Zara stood contemplating the challenge ahead. The hard work of rebuilding was about to begin. The Skyline Airlines executive boardroom was transformed. The dark mahogany table was replaced by a circular arrangement. Digital screens displayed real-time metrics, alongside newly implemented discrimination complaint statistics, transparency, replacing secrecy. Former federal prosecutor Elena Vasquez presented the findings from the independent investigation Zara had commissioned. The investigation findings exceed even our worst expectations, Elena began. "We've documented 347 cases of explicit racial discrimination over the past decade, with patterns suggesting thousands more unreported incidents." The core of the issue wasn't a few bad actors. It was a system built on prejudice and protected by senior management. Zara's victory wasn't just a win for ownership. It was a mandate for transformation. She now faced the monumental task of dismantling decades of entrenched bias. The long, difficult work of creating an airline where everyone truly belonged was finally underway. Zara Johnson's fight against a single, hostile flight attendant ultimately exposed an industry-wide conspiracy of racism and corporate corruption. She didn't just win. She set a new standard for accountability. The presentation inside the Skyline Airlines executive boardroom detailed a sophisticated system spanning every aspect of airline operations. Flight attendants received coded training about passenger value assessment, based predominantly on race and perceived wealth. Gate agents were instructed to scrutinize certain passengers' tickets more closely. Promotion committees used criteria specifically designed to disadvantage non-white employees. Most disturbing, Elena Vasquez, the former federal prosecutor leading the investigation, continued displaying financial records, is the dedicated fund established for quietly settling discrimination claims, budgeted annually at $8 million. These settlements included aggressive non-disclosure agreements and often resulted in the termination of the complainants. The documents revealed Margaret Whitfield's central role as the cultural guardian of the airline, ensuring it maintained its traditional passenger appeal, a euphemism for catering primarily to wealthy white customers. Richard Harmon's contribution was operational implementation. Voice recordings recovered from Margaret's phone captured him instructing department heads to maintain appropriate demographic balances in visible positions. In legal terms, Elena concluded grimly, this constitutes a textbook civil rights conspiracy. The evidence supports criminal charges against both primary architects and numerous secondary participants. Zara allowed the moment to resonate. This isn't just Skyline's problem. We found evidence of similar systems at 6 major competitors orchestrated through industry, associations, and shared consultants. She displayed communications showing how Richard and Margaret had shared their passenger management techniques, creating common practices that disproportionately impacted minority travelers across multiple airlines. What had seemed like isolated incidents were actually manifestations of coordinated policy. Our response must be equally systematic, Zara continued, detailing an ambitious reform plan. Mandatory unconscious bias training, anonymous complaint channels with independent investigation, demographic auditing of service quality, and promotion criteria based exclusively on measurable performance metrics. Most significantly, Zara announced the creation of a public-facing dashboard reporting discrimination statistics quarterly, radical transparency unprecedented in the industry. As the meeting progressed, an urgent message arrived. Federal prosecutors had filed formal charges against Richard Harmon and Margaret Whitfield for conspiracy against civil rights, wire fraud, and securities violations. The news spread quickly. For employees who had suffered, it was long-delayed accountability. Amid the tense atmosphere, Stephanie Walsh requested a meeting with Zara. I participated in discrimination that hurt countless passengers, Stephanie began, accepting Zara's direct unsympathetic assessment. I'm asking for the opportunity to help fix what I helped break. I know the system intimately. The proposal was pragmatic. Zara agreed to let Stephanie work with the Ethics Oversight Committee in an advisory capacity only. No passenger contact, no supervisory authority, Zara stipulated. Most importantly, you'd participate in a public accountability process, speaking candidly about past practices so we can educate the industry. Stephanie accepted immediately, a path to redemption through genuine contribution. Meanwhile, Richard Harmon faced arraignment. Television cameras captured him entering the courthouse, his confidence replaced by visible strain. He rejected initial plea offers, but the weakness of his defense became clear. Richard's fellow executives had already accepted immunity deals in exchange for testimony. Margaret, the pragmatist, initiated back-channel discussions about cooperation. Federal prosecutors sought Zara's help in building cases against other airlines. Her team debated the ethical dilemma. Should they focus exclusively on reforming Skyline or perpetuate the fight industry-wide? Vivian offered a solution. We create an industry consortium focused on anti-discrimination best practices. We share our reforms, metrics, and methods openly. Airlines can join voluntarily or explain to the public why they won't. Zara approved, recognizing that lasting change required transformation beyond Skyline alone. The personal toll on Zara was evident. Winning the battle isn't the same as winning the war, she confessed to Jason Miller. The same systems that protected them exist in every industry. The conversation was interrupted by breaking news. Richard Harmon suffered an apparent stress-induced cardiac event during a court hearing. Zara, recognizing the media's tendency to pivot from crime to sympathy, took control of the narrative. She scheduled a press conference focused not on Richard's health, but on Skyline's forward-looking reforms. What happened on my flight wasn't about one flight attendant or one passenger, she emphasized. It reflected systematic policies that harmed thousands of travelers and employees. The disciplined messaging worked. News coverage shifted back to substance. Skyline stock stabilized and began recovering. Employee satisfaction scores, particularly among marginalized groups, rose dramatically. Operational metrics improved, challenging the cynical assumption that diversity and performance were in opposition. These positive developments culminated in a pivotal moment. Federal prosecutors revealed their expanded case against Richard and Margaret, including new charges for civil rights conspiracy and witness tampering. The potential sentences now exceeded 20 years. As Zara left the federal building, she briefly encountered Margaret Whitfield, accompanied by her legal team. Margaret was concluding a cooperation agreement with prosecutors. For Margaret, discrimination was merely a business strategy. That clinical approach had finally met its reckoning. Back at Skyline, Zara addressed the entire company, presenting the complete evidence gathered. "The evidence shows this wasn't accidental," she stated clearly. "These policies were deliberately created, carefully documented, and methodically enforced throughout the company." The presentation included audio, recordings of Richard and Margaret, and transcripts showing how racism had been embedded in evaluation criteria. Everyone in this room either participated in these systems, benefited from them, or was harmed by them, Zara concluded. "We all share responsibility for ensuring these systems are dismantled permanently." The ensuing dialogue was thoughtful silence, followed by difficult questions. Carlos Rivera asked, "How do we rebuild trust with passengers who experience discrimination?" "We start by acknowledging the specific harm done," Zara replied. "Not with generic corporate apologies, but with direct recognition of how our practices affected real people." Meanwhile, across town, Richard Harmon faced a critical hearing. Prosecutors played recordings of his voice instructing managers to create pretexts for removing certain passengers from premium cabins. When asked how he pleaded to the expanded charges, Richard's confidence finally crumbled. He uttered a single word: guilty. The plea agreement, in exchange for cooperation identifying industry-wide discriminatory practices, would spare him maximum penalties, but significant prison time remained inevitable. Richard's admission transformed Zara's experience from an individual complaint to an acknowledged pattern, validating countless others. The man who had embodied the airline's leadership for decades had admitted to orchestrating systematic civil rights violations. Later that evening, Zara and Vivian reflected. Richard pleading guilty. "These are just first steps," Zara admitted. "The systems that protected him exist throughout business, government, education. What you've done at Skyline creates a template others can follow," Vivian replied. Her words were prophetic. Federal authorities, building on the Skyline evidence, had opened formal investigations into 3 additional major airlines for similar discriminatory practices. The conspiracy Richard and Margaret had nurtured for decades was unraveling. 1 month after the guilty plea, Skyline hosted an unprecedented event, welcoming hundreds of former employees who had filed discrimination complaints. The grand ballroom was used not for executives, but for reconciliation. The comprehensive remediation plan unveiled included financial compensation, reinstatement, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee with unprecedented authority to review all discrimination complaints, a complete reversal of past practices. The airline's notorious premium passenger profile was replaced with transparent service standards. Hiring and promotion now used measurable performance metrics. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment declined by 70%. The biggest test came during Stephanie Walsh's public appearance at an industry conference. She delivered unflinching testimony. "We were trained to use coded language to identify black and brown passengers for removal from premium cabins. It wasn't about individual prejudice, it was company policy." Her testimony, which went viral, forced difficult conversations throughout the aviation sector. Finally, at his sentencing hearing, Richard Harmon received a 12-year prison sentence for civil rights violations, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. The final confrontation had ended. What began with one black teenager refusing to surrender her seat had catalyzed a reckoning extending far beyond one airline. The systems wouldn't change overnight, but they would change. That certainty sustained her. The potential prison sentences facing Richard Harmon and Margaret Whitfield, up to 20 years, underscored the severity of their crimes, not just discrimination, but a calculated civil rights conspiracy. As Zara prepared for the company-wide address, she watched Margaret leave the federal building after securing her cooperation agreement. The elderly aristocrat's gaze holding only cold calculation. Back at Skyline, Zara presented the complete evidence. She displayed internal memos with coded language about passenger demographics, audio recordings of Richard and Margaret, and transcripts showing how racism had been embedded in evaluation criteria. This wasn't isolated prejudice, but an elaborate system designed at the highest levels to institutionalize discrimination, Zara stated clearly. The response was a profound silence. Flight attendant Carlos Rivera broke it, asking, "How do we rebuild trust with passengers? How do we make amends?" "We start by acknowledging the specific harm done," Zara replied. "Not with generic corporate apologies, but with direct recognition of how our practices affected real people. Then we implement concrete changes." Meanwhile, in the federal courthouse, Richard Harmon, weakened and facing the expanded case, uttered a single word that represented the collapse of his decades of power: guilty. His 12-year prison sentence for civil rights violations, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice confirmed what many employees had long suspected. Margaret Whitfield received a lesser sentence of 5 years due to her cooperation, though the court ordered the disgorgement of millions in profits traceable to the discriminatory practices. Zara knew the work was just beginning. The systems that protected him exist throughout business, government, education, she confessed to Vivian. "What you've done at Skyline creates a template others can follow," Vivian replied. Federal authorities, acting on evidence uncovered at Skyline, subsequently opened formal investigations into 3 additional major airlines. The industry-wide conspiracy was unraveling completely. 1 month after Richard's plea, Skyline hosted an unprecedented event, welcoming hundreds of former employees whose careers and dignity had been sacrificed. The comprehensive remediation plan included financial compensation, reinstatement opportunities, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee with authority to review all discrimination complaints, a reversal of previous practices. The airline's coded premium passenger profile was replaced with transparent service. Standards, hiring, and promotion now used measurable performance metrics over subjective criteria. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment declined by 70%. The ultimate validation came when the stock price hit an all-time high. "Turns out ethics and profits aren't mutually exclusive after all," Carlos Rivera announced. The Skyline standard quickly became the benchmark. Stephanie Walsh delivered unflinching public testimony. It was company policy carefully designed to appear non-discriminatory while achieving discriminatory outcomes. The resulting pressure forced long overdue conversations throughout the aviation sector. Zara's own testimony before the Congressional Transportation Committee focused on the need for structural changes to accountability systems. 6 months later, Skyline hosted a reopening ceremony for its redesigned corporate headquarters, featuring transparent glass walls and collaborative workspaces. At the event, Zara announced the Skyline Justice Fund, endowed with $50 million from company profits to support discrimination victims throughout the transportation industry. The final company slogan, displayed on a screen in the redesigned boardroom, captured the transformation. "Everyone belongs in first class." The story of Zara Johnson is a testament that systemic discrimination can be dismantled when moral clarity meets strategic action. Richard Harmon and Margaret Whitfield faced justice, and the $50 million Skyline Justice Fund will help others continue the fight. If you believe accountability and structural change are the keys to tackling injustice in corporate America, hit that like button and subscribe. Has this story inspired you to speak up when you see injustice happening around you? Share your experience in the comments. Comment courage if you believe speaking truth to power makes a difference. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey